are walking through the door right now. Thank you very much. Just to find your preferred seat. And just before we begin with an outline of what our final day is going to achieve, Alan Koshland.
Hello, I just want to make one comment of thanking Gelp Israel for the beautiful flowers that are with us every day that symbolize the whole spirit of beauty and celebration and spirit. And thank you just so much.
And that actually just gives me the opportunity to acknowledge Alan Koshland, because our Global Education Leaders Partnership has enjoyed support from multiple organisations, philanthropists and those who are committed to the transformation journey that we're on. And for a number of years, if it hadn't been for Alan Koshland and the support that you provided, we would have had great difficulty in maintaining the momentum. So thank you very much. Valerie, come and join me here because we just want to do an introduction to the third and final day. It's the fourth day for our international family because, as you know, we had an induction on day one in Jerusalem. But this is the moment when we shift gear a little bit. Let's just to remind you, on day one we were focused upon the fact that the future is quite a challenging prospect for us and that we will need more adaptive education systems. Whatever those systems look like, they will need to be more adaptive to a volatile and uncertain, ambiguous future, and complex. So we'll need to have complex adaptive systems to respond. Day two, we privileged the emergence of learning ecosystems. So we put the spotlight on what many of us are engaged in. And I think there was a real sense yesterday that we are making serious progress on that agenda. But it's not the whole of the agenda, because as we framed our time together for this 15th Gelp, we were talking about anticipating the future and leading education transformation. So, Valerie, I just wanted to say how we might think about entering day three with a broader agenda. And you'll notice that throughout the day there's going to be opportunities not only for jurisdictions to talk about the progress they're making on the broader educational transformation work, but we've got global organisations that are contributing to that work, and we've got movement building. There's movement starting to come together in order to think about how we can progress this agenda. Valerie, yesterday you set up a set of challenges for us, certainly in terms of the local learning ecosystem space. Can you say a word about those challenges, and perhaps do we need to broaden these challenges given the wider lens we've got today?
Thanks, Tony. I come back to this just because some people have remarked that actually out of this, what would be an extraordinarily helpful development would be for us to be thinking strategically and tactically how we together help these pioneers tackle these issues. And I sense that's what you guys were trying to do in terms of thinking about the issues around governance, for example. But I think what the point of this brief interlude before we get cracking on day three is just to remind ourselves that the whole issue about ecosystems is one part of a broader agenda. It's not the whole deal. The logic of transforming learning and transforming education systems, as I think we tried to suggest to you yesterday, drives us to this idea of broadening the notion of the school to incorporate the ecosystemic approach. But let us not forget that Gelp itself, and indeed transformation efforts across the world, are much, much bigger than that. They must include, obviously, transformation of teaching and learning in the classroom itself. And lest anyone think we don't believe that's important, the reverse is true. And there are so many people in this room who are devoting their lives really to that activity. So the transformation of pedagogy, innovation in assessment, which is the major roadblock, in a sense, to making progress, changes in forms of leadership, school leadership and broader leadership, which is in part picked up here, but not wholly, are a critical piece. And so many other issues to do with the school in itself. For example, one final is, of course, the role of information technology in the universe of artificial intelligence and what that means to our teaching and learning processes. So all of that is a part of a broader agenda within which the progress towards learning ecosystems fits. And it's right that Gelp, I know many people have said to me, okay, that's it. I am mentally exhausted. My brain is kaput now. And I kind of feel the same, so I'm sorry if I'm not making a lot of sense now. I think we're all very tired. But the point is that we go deep and we go hard, and we've been drenching ourselves in ideas and trying to interrogate them at more than the superficial level. But that depth and intensity is at the cost of thinking about the broader picture. So I think we just wanted to bring that back into focus, remember those issues about pedagogy, assessment, leadership, technology, and a host of other issues which actually, generally speaking, preoccupy education conferences. But Gelp hasn't forgotten about them, and towards the end of the morning we're going to be giving some exciting announcements about where we go next with this movement, go next both in terms geographically and also intellectually.
Great, thank you. Noah, we had a conversation this morning just as I arrived, because we were yesterday together in the governance round table, and we didn't have the opportunity perhaps to sharpen up the significance of some of the challenges. And given that you are an expert in drafting, writing law, regulations and law surrounding the way in which we think about the current system, as a lawyer, you said to me, Tony, I think we just need to be clear that some of these challenges are enormous. Just say a word about that, just so we get ourselves into the right headspace about what kind of challenges we're looking at.
Thank you, Tony. Good morning. I'm sorry for my English. I don't have a professional English like you guys have, and this is why most of the time I listened and I didn't speak a lot. But I heard you, and I told Tony that I think that you're privileged to dream those dreams and fulfilling and being able to write those beautiful projects of innovation. But where I come from, as an attorney who practices educational law, who helps to write the regulation, who practices legislation here in Israel, I see the huge gap between the visions, between the projects that you represent here, between where you think that the education system should go and where we're actually at. What I do with my day-to-day with the education system is striving to survive, striving to make ends meet regarding the budget, the expertise, the ability to make the school better regarding the teaching method and teachers' skills and educators' skills. And I think the way I see it, we have a long way to go regarding regulation things in order to reach those visions and those projects and those innovations, beautiful ideas that I heard here in Israel. And we have to come back a notch down and think about the way that needs to be done in order to achieve a little part of it here. Thank you.
Brilliant. I think it's... Thank you. Yulita Meir, come and join me over here on the seats. And I just think that that is such a powerful statement on a day when we are going to focus upon leading education transformation. When we began this journey, we often talked about the split screen, that we need to focus both on how we are able to achieve incremental improvement and how we should try and think about the wider, the more adventurous and ambitious transformation agenda. I think it's great that you remind us that all of us in this room are in both spaces. We are doing both improvement, reform work in our respective organisations and jurisdictions, as well as wanting to be leaders of transformation. So can I just say to all of you that in terms of the challenges, it would be helpful to us if before you go to your breakout sessions this morning, if you might just do one more round of sticky notes, post-its. If you could reflect between now and when you go to those sessions on the nature of the challenges that you're facing, particularly around the transformation agenda, of course. I mean, you can add personal challenges if you like, but, you know, we don't necessarily want to have a whole lot of information about your private lives. So if you could put a challenge that you are really facing and the kind of support that you believe that you will need, that would be a really helpful addition to our storyline. Okay, so a post-it in relation to a challenge and the kind of support that you believe would be of great assistance to you, that would be superb before you go to those breakouts. Yuli, welcome. This is a brilliant segue because leadership is everything around this agenda. And for those of you who know Yuli's background, which I'm about to ask her to outline briefly, we have a leader who has been engaged in this work at multiple levels of the system over a period of time where we've seen huge change. Just help us with the kind of journey you've been on in relation to your own professional life.
Okay, sorry. That seems to be a question that will demand a long story, that will take too much time. But I want to say something about my interest in education and the way I see this move from the civic sphere, the university, to a ministerial position and back. And I think that one of the advantages of being positioned in almost every possible position as an activist in the field of education, as a member of the Parliamentary Committee of Education, as a professor in a school of education, and as a minister of education, that it allows me, I think, to understand the system and the interrelationship between all these groups. Because, as Noah just said, at the end of the day, in order to promote a move in whatever sphere, but especially in education, you have to understand the system. Otherwise, you're doing a lot of local things, but the system remains untouched. And education systems are very resilient. They don't like to change. And they are very happy to have lots of people doing lots of small things around them that they could introduce as change while the system continues doing what it knows how to do without any transformation. So I think moving from between these spheres allowed me to have this perspective. It was helpful as a minister, and it's even more helpful now when I write about education, because I think I can see the way the system works and understand it better.
Let me make an assertion that others have made, so therefore I'm feeling pretty confident about this. You have, I think, the legacy of being the most adventurous Minister of Education in and around a reform agenda. In other words, your own period of time saw the most comprehensive reform agenda. Say a word or two about what you were trying to achieve, and at this moment, as you reflect back on that period, what you feel you did achieve in shifting the system.
Well, first of all, in Wikipedia it says I was a controversial minister because of all sorts of political issues I was involved in. But Nachum, who sits here and who has a historical view on education, Nachum Balas, says there were 3 reformative ministers, and I'm happy he counts me as one of them. I think, let me say 3 things about educational reforms. First of all, when you become a minister of education, your mind is clouded with 3,000 ideas that you had before. And you think all of them, or let's say 2,000 of them, are extremely important and urgent. So I think the first stage, and it took me a few months, during which, by the way, I was highly criticized for not doing anything, I tried to see what I can do and where I could make a continuous influence, rather than just run around all the good ideas that were around. And lots of people came to me and they had these wonderful ideas, and everybody was right, but I had to choose. And I think learning how to choose is a quality people who run systems need to acquire, because it's not only to choosing what to do, it's mainly choosing what not to do and explaining it, because you're accountable to the public. So you have to say, I'm doing this, and I'm not doing that. And I know that I'm not doing that because I'm doing this. And I think that this is more important. So that's lesson number one. The second thing is, for me, that any change in education must be dealt with through the system. I'm a radical person in my personal life. I'm a system person in my professional life. I work with the system. And part of the time that I didn't do anything was an attempt to rebuild trust with the system that the former minister actually kept on bringing people from the outside to let the system get advices from all these wise people, but didn't work with the Ministry of Education. So the ministry itself was ruined. I mean, they lost their leadership, they lost their trust, they lost their ability to lead within the system. They were very weak. So rebuilding their confidence and their ability and their will to collaborate, I think is essential when you work with human systems. You can't do a change unless you convince, not everybody, you'll never convince, but a lot of people in your administration, among the teachers, among the headmasters, that what you are doing is worthwhile. So that's the second lesson. And the third one was here on the board just recently, was budgeting. There is no reason to do short-term things in education. So unless you can secure long-term budgeting, then you're wasting your time. And the system is extremely tired from short-term changes. So I had to choose a project that I could do with the system, that I can budget, and budget, I wouldn't say eternally, because it does, but put it in the basis of the budget for years to come, and that I thought was important. And I chose to do a combination of changing the way we are paying teachers. When I came in, the entry salary of a teacher was about $700, which was really unbearable. So we did three things together. We raised the salaries considerably. We changed the way the professional education system work, the hours that teachers are in school, their professional development. We were aspiring, we didn't have time to deal with the way they are trained and the way they are teaching, because as it was said earlier, if it doesn't happen in the classroom, it doesn't mean a lot. And we added to the schools a lot of small group teachings, something that is essential in Israel because we have large classes and very crowded school environments. So once we had an idea how to do it, we entered into negotiation with the unions. The Israelis, remember, they are very difficult negotiations. There was a strike. There were many difficulties along the way. But when we came out with an agreement, with the union, and the union preserves the reform. After I was gone, they were the protector of the reform. Second, we had a reform that is actually not legislated. I don't believe in legislation in education because it's so easy to go around it. What we did, we signed it as a collective wage agreement, which is something that is very, very difficult to undo. Try to touch the wage agreement of unions. You'll find that this is a very, if not impossible thing to change. And we gave room for the pedagogical sphere to start develop. And we said start develop because it's still developing. It's 10 years from then. The reform was implemented, all of it, and still we left places for changes, revisions, revisiting all sorts of issues because it's never done.
Well, let me ask you this. If I put to you that all of what you've said is absolutely vital to build the enabling conditions for the system to improve, and that's necessary, but in our language here, it won't be sufficient. So therefore, now with the opportunity to look one removed, yeah, to think about the nature of what now is required to go from a high-performing system where you actually created enabling conditions. You had a clear vision, you got authorization and legitimacy from multiple sources in order to be able to progress this agenda, and you built the capacity of the key players in the system, yeah? But what would you now say if I said to you, look, the transformation game has got different assumptions. It's got different outcomes. The metrics that we are talking about here are different. What is your advice as you think about that period of professional life and now continuing that work? But what's your advice about how we are able to strengthen our capacity to transform the system, not just to improve it, not just to ensure that in fact it's working as effectively as possible within the current paradigm? What's your advice about how we can shift the system to transform it?
First of all, remove as far as possible evaluations, testings, and standardizing the system. That's the first thing. Second, which goes naturally with that, is giving teachers more autonomy to teach and experiment. You can't have a system that is renewing itself permanently if teachers have no time and are not seen as professional. And I know I irritated you yesterday when I sort of over-intervened in the conversation. But for me, the next stage is to develop teachers as leaders and give them the time and the professional training to make changes in their schools. I came when the system was starved. I mean, people were dropping out because they couldn't make a living as a teacher. So that was a first priority, in the rank of needs. Just getting the basis is preliminary. Now, I think we need to go further and develop the teaching profession. And I think one of the worst things that happens to teaching and to the education field in general is that it's not conceived as a respectful profession. I'll give you an example. I have now this little fight. I have these little fights that I keep on fighting in different spheres. The Israeli Academy of Arts and Science has not even one professor of education among it. And every year I phone them and said, I think you should have at least one. And the reason is because it's a statement about how the state sees professionalism. And every year they said, well, we have to think about it. I don't think we have anyone up to standard, which is, I think, is a rude answer because they are great. The people who won the Israeli prize, the people who won many other prizes, there's no reason they won't have educators among it, but it's not seen as a profession. When the government sits talking about whatever, about roads, they will bring an engineer. When they speak about education, everyone says, I know a lot about education. My wife is a teacher. Yeah. By the way, this is the sentence that can drive me crazy. Yeah. And even Barack Obama in his inauguration, he said, I think his sister's name is Maya. My sister Maya is a teacher, and Joe Biden's wife is a teacher, so we are committed to education. No, you're not. They are committed to education. You're doing something else. So it's this confusion but it goes very deep. This is why I believe we have to fight really for our professional standing, from the professional level to the teachers, the headmasters, and therefore I would very much like to see more effort done in empowering the system than empowering people who are surrounding the system.
Okay, final question. More personal. And I'm sorry, I know the time is actually, but yeah. Fantastic. That's what I was going to ask you. I think we might just go to the floor in a moment. Okay. But I've got one more question for you. It's this. It's more personal. we are talking about leading this work, yeah? The leadership challenge is a hugely significant personal challenge. We were saying to ourselves, if you don't transform yourself, you can't be leading transformation, right? You have to authorize yourself to change in order to do this work. What's your reflection on your own leadership? Because to be able to take the role that you took and to drive the reform agenda, you had personal and political commitment to that task. So in a sentence or a paragraph.
In 2 words, I had two assets. One is the Prime Minister, who stood behind me all the way, and it was a very difficult fight, and put in the money. 7 billion shekels for a reform, never before. So without him, I would not be able to do it. And second, it was that I came with a professional background. And when I presented the reform in the government, for example, I was very clear. People said, no, go have smaller classes, have this, have that. I said, no. Research shows that this is wrong. And I could stand against Andrea Schleicher, my friend, and said, forget about PISA. There are better things to invest in. Don't put all the money in preparing to PISA. There are other things we should be. And I had the strength to do it because I've researched, learned, and I came with enough of a professional background not to be intimidated by people putting pressure on things that are maybe very popular, but not extremely important to the field itself.
Great. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
That's fantastic.
Tony,
Don't go away.
just conscious that there are people in the room who daily live at the interface between education and politics, and it'd be great to have some of your perspective included. And I think in Gelp, we've tried to explore some of the issues around politics and education, not believing that education can somehow be taken out of politics, but needing to ingrain it even more. How come it is such an irrelevance when elections come around? So who would like to start with
Good
some
question.
questions?
Nobody in the election campaign now says he or she wants to be a Minister of Education.
They're interested.
Everybody wants defense.
Politics in Ontario?
Including the current
Politics
Minister for
in the
Education.
UK?
Thank you. Those were wonderful comments. I just wanted to say, because the first day when Andreas was here, he was pointing to Ontario as an example of a good system, and I'm from Ontario. And I have to say that the single thing that our government at the time did, I was explaining, that they came in explicitly on a mandate of peace and stability in the school system, because our school system 15 years ago was like a war zone. The unions were fighting with the government, and nothing could be achieved. No transformation, no improvement, nothing. And it was really only once the government acknowledged the importance of bringing the teacher unions and the teaching profession on side that we were able to make enormous gains in education. And I would argue that while we may not have a completely transformed education system, we certainly had huge numbers of innovation in our education system, which took the students, the system very, very far. So thank you for your comments. It wasn't a question I had, I just wanted to add that.
Thank you very much, Shirley. I really loved what you had to say. Just two reflections that link to a question. The first is, what do you think then is going to disrupt education in Israel? And is that going to come from the outside, whether that's through technology or other aspects? Given that we were talking about learning ecosystems yesterday, where we're talking about joined up services in the community that actually can support teachers and education and relieve that workload. So what's going to disrupt? Second thing, coming to your point about the professional value of educators, I really like what you had to say, as I do think as an Australian, I think Australia has lacked the ability to value and respect the educational profession. And I'm interested then to know, which countries do you think are getting it right with regards to valuing teachers in the right way? And what do you think they're doing that you would like to see happen in Israel? So the disruption and then professional respect of teachers.
Take one more, two more, okay, and then I'm going to ask if, thank you. We'll come back. Okay, so over here. Good.
You were talking about teachers, and I would like to hear your thoughts about school principals.
Thank you. Can you remember all of these? Good. Okay, good. Okay, and there's another one,
And
Valerie at the back, behind you. Okay.
Yuli, that was a great. I'm over here in front of you. That was a great presentation, and I would like you, if you could, refer to what Noah said at the beginning, the problem of dealing with the legislators and the bureaucracy of the office. How can you do change with those chains?
Okay, I'll start.
What do you think will be can be in the contribution of the research community to politicians?
Wow. Okay, if I forget something, you remind me. Headmasters, head teachers are the most important people in the school. We created a school for headmasters during my term. It is very important because now the difference between a good school and a not so good school is a good headmaster. Training headmasters, professional upgrade, constant professional tutoring, helping, supporting, and maybe now I know there's a new agreement also about raising the salary of headmasters so you are able to recruit better people. No, not working. Okay, but it should be done. I know in the reform, this is one of the things that happened. Unfortunately, headmasters were not rewarded enough because they're such a tiny group within the union. Talking about speaking to unions, it has its pros and cons. But I think the headmasters are an incredibly important group, and I think we have a lot of great headmasters, but recruiting and supporting them is a very important issue. As for disruption, look, there are many ways to make education better. I'm not necessarily a fan of technology. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Giving autonomy means that you really do it in different ways. I'll tell you, though, what prevents improvement. Two things. And the second thing relates to the last question. First of all, one should remember, and for me this is the greatest difficulty in Israeli education, and it has nothing to do with teachers, and it has nothing to do with education. It's poverty. 33% of the children in Israel come to school. They are poor. They are not hungry, but they face nutritional problems, and they are socially and culturally alienated.